Section 23 of Psychology, the Cognitive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Cognitive Powers by James McCosh. Book 3, The Comparative Powers. Chapter 1, Office of the Comparative Powers. Hitherto, every mental perception or apprehension coming before us has been singular. All objects observed by the senses, external and internal, have been unconnected. These, when reproduced by the memory, and even by the imagination, are still units. By the latter of these powers we may join the tail of a fish to the body of a woman, but the mermaid thus fashioned is quite as individual a thing as the woman or the fish in our idea of it. We are now to consider the mental power which notices the relations of objects, and thus binds them in our apprehension. It may be called comparison, and is defined as the faculty which discovers relations. It observes first the relations of objects given by the simple cognitive and reproductive powers, and then goes on to observe relations between these, on and on, to an indefinite extent. It can notice the relation of classes to classes, and pursue effect on to cause, and a cause on to a prior cause, and so with all other relations. 1. The discovery of relations proceeds on a knowledge of the objects related. Even as the objects perceived to be related are real, so are also the relations perceived. I lay down this proposition in opposition to one of the sceptical doctrines of the present day. There are metaphysicians who tell us that things themselves are unknown to us, and that we perceive only the relations of things. This makes the relations perceived subjective, that is, merely in the mind. In standing up for the veracity of our cognitive faculties and the reality of things, we should set aside both these positions and maintain that the things perceived and the relations perceived between them are both real. No doubt the reality of the two is somewhat different, the reality of substances and the reality of the relation of substances. But as the substances, say mind and body, exist, so do the relations exist in the substances. These two lilies exist, but so also does their resemblance in the possession of the same form. These things that constitute a cause are real, and also those which constitute the effect, but the power in the cause to produce the effect is also and equally a reality. 2. Man's knowledge begins not with relations but with things. In laying down this proposition I undermine one of the most fatal, as I regard it, errors of the day. It is said that all man's knowledge is relative. I look on this as a mistake, logically and chronologically. Our consciousness being witness, we regard ourselves as having a knowledge of this thing and that thing, say of a brown horse, or of ourselves as perceiving it. Having got this knowledge, we may then compare two or more objects thus known and discover some connection between them, as that they are like each other, or that they differ from each other, or that the one attracts the other. We discover the relation because we so far know the things and perceive the relations to be in the things. This gives us a positive, as opposed to a relative theory of knowledge. Instead of saying that we know the relations of things themselves unknown, the correct statement is that we discover the relations of things known and discover the relations because we know the things. In this way, we avoid that most subtle scepticism of our day, which begins with the doctrine of relativity and ends with nescience or agnosticism. 3. It is wrong to maintain, as so many do in the present day, that the only relations which the mind can discover are those of agreement and difference. This is another of the ways in which sensationalists and positivists are narrowing the capacities of the human mind and undermining our belief in the reality of things. They first represent us as incapable of knowing things. Then they make the relations not to be in the things. Thirdly, they speak of agreements and differences as the only relations which the mind can discover. Having so limited human capacity, many are prepared to account for it by material agency, or simply by the action of powers unknown. But to discover that things agree or disagree, we must know something of the things, we must know some of the qualities of the things. Further, we discover more or less clearly what it is that they agree or disagree in. It must be in form or property, or something else known or conceived. End of section 23.